All right. So, welcome to the Nathaneal podcast today. We have a very good friend of mine from X, David Lovejoy. Welcome, David.
Pleasure to be here, Nathaneal.
Yeah, it's great to have you. I know you're a fellow podcaster yourself, and but would you want to introduce yourself to the audience right now?
Sure. I call myself a tour guide. I mean, that's pretty much the most significant job I've ever had. I feel I learned a lot. Lived in Asia for about a decade. Took small groups around Japan for about 7 of those years. Myanmar and Vietnam on occasion as well. Uh, like I said, learned a lot. Pandemic cut that short. Went to business school and kind of took that tourism mindset to business and global networking. And now I have a podcast, like you mentioned, Horizon Search podcast. If you're interested, I speak to people like Nathaneal all around the world and learn a lot myself and hopefully share that with the audience.
That's great. That's great. And I think that is quite connected to your Twitter banner, which is very interesting for me. Explore, learn, evolve. Would you mind trying to explain that?
Yeah, I felt that I had a lot of blind spots. I mean, we all do, but mine were very apparent to me. I just couldn't quite, as the name suggests, figure out what they were. So I thought by putting myself in new environments, in every sense of the word, I would start to unearth kind of what I needed to learn, meet more people. And it was frustrating at first because it took so long. Like it never happened, never happened. And then all of a sudden everything happened at once, as they say. And it's not like now I know everything. It's just like, oh, okay. Now I know where pay dirt is and I'm just headed in that direction. And it's a lot of fun. So don't give up would be my advice if anyone's kind of thinking, can relate to that. And so that's the explore, learn, and evolve part of my banner.
Gotcha, gotcha. And you mentioned that you were a tour guide before. I'm curious, when you were a kid, did you already have the vision of being a tour guide, or like what was your initial vision as a child?
Great question. I don't know if we want to go all the way back to when I was a kid. I mean, it's kind of funny. I could share a little bit. I always wanted to do something extreme. So I wanted to be like an astronaut or a race car driver.
Dope.
Tourism, when did that happen? I like travel.
Right.
I think when I graduated high school, my grandma took us to her home country of Croatia. And that was my first time being in Europe and really being outside of North America, I believe. And that was just a really interesting experience, like different languages, the proximity of different countries to each other. Because I grew up in Southern California. So there was Mexico, of course, to the south, but it was quite some distance to get to like several other countries. Whereas in Europe and Southeast Asia, it's a lot, you can get there a lot more quickly. So I definitely wanted to travel more and I wanted to learn more. But actually, I kind of romanticized about being a taxi driver because I thought in a taxi, you have to remember a lot of directions and there's a little bit of a game going on where you've got like a task that you have to complete in a certain amount of time, but then you have some creativity as to how you do it. Of course, you should follow the road rules, but like which roads you take and adapting to chaos, if you will. I thought that was cool. And then meeting different people just for like snippets and then taking that learning and kind of compounding it. I was never a taxi driver, but tourism kind of ticked a lot of those boxes. And I went on a tour. Well, I could talk about this a lot. I'll try to keep this
Go
short.
for it. Go for it.
Well, it's like two separate tangents. So I'll kind of try to stay on the path I'm on. So I went on a tour in Ha Long Bay in North Vietnam. It was just a overnight tour. You sleep on one of these dragon boats in the bay, and it was a nice experience. And our tour guide was excellent. And I asked her like what it's like, and the way she described it matched a lot of kind of what I described about my my thoughts about being a taxi driver.
Right.
And I was like, well, maybe tourism could kind of tick those boxes. But I just that was like a seed I planted in the back of my head. I didn't actively pursue being a tour guide until like a year or two later. And I was I wanted to go back to Japan. My initial 2 years in Japan, I was there as an English teacher through the JET program. And there's kind of it's a great experience. I'd recommend it to anyone if you're looking to learn about a new culture. But in that particular time, in that particular context, there's a limit to like your expansion or your growth within that role, I felt. So I wanted to do something different. And I thought, why not tourism? I love Japan. I lived there a little bit. I like to travel. Like, I have a little background in education. Maybe I could combine these things and apply it to becoming a tour guide. And well, here's the other path that I mentioned, the tangent. So my only other time aside from the Halong Bay experience of being on a tour was a few years prior to that in Rome. I was hopping over there. I think it was longer than a weekend, but a few days from visiting my grandma in Croatia. And my uncle was there and my brother was there. And I don't know if it's my mom or my grandma or someone else who said, you should book a half-day tour in Rome just to get a lay of the land. So I did. And it was like 50 or 100 people in the group. And we followed this cute older gentleman with like a silver umbrella around like school children. And then when we ate lunch, we were like farm animals. Like it was just like we had the whole restaurant to ourselves. There was no like mingling with the locals. And we got our slop, and the staff was too busy to engage with us. I wanted to practice some Italian, and then it's like, eat and get out of here. I've got stuff to do. It wasn't like a warm experience for me in that time. And there's probably many reasons why. If you had a great tour experience, I don't mean to besmirch that. But anyway, that kind of put a damper on the concept of tourism for me. So when I wanted to be a tour guide myself, it was really that lady in Halong Bay that kind of made me look at it in a new light. And I was cautious entering into it. But the difference was in this case, I was a small group tour guide. What I was on in Rome was a large group. I would say 50 to 100. Small group in this case was 14, max like 22, I think. And so there's a little bit more intimacy. You get to know everyone's names. You travel with the locals. This was 2014 when I started, and quite a few times, many of the locals asked if we were a family. They weren't yet used to tourism. Now that I think they are, but back then it was kind of cute. They just thought we were a family traveling around, and that's kind of the concept. That you want to be agile, you want to be able to mingle with the locals. I'd plan in dead time so that there's nothing to see or do except go out and explore.
Yeah.
So, and those were like the best days of the tour, I think, for me and for everyone, because you get those authentic experiences. But I probably talked a lot. Feel free to.
No, that was great. That was great. That was great. And I'd like to clarify that. So you went to Japan as an educator. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Right. So how did that happen? Like, how did you go to Japan as an educator?
Good question. I'd have to go back just a little bit further. And okay, I'll start with, because it's all connected.
Yeah, for sure. Go for it.
So I was born, just kidding. So I was, let's see, university. Okay, that's probably where the origin kind of bedrock of this answer comes from. Didn't know what I wanted to do.
Okay.
Curious about everything.
Yeah.
Chemistry was kind of hard for me. I appreciate it, but it wasn't my jam. Other than that, like pretty much everything was like fascinating, and I had some capability in it, or I could apply myself and learn it. So it wasn't clear to me at that time what I should do. This is where having a mentor, I think, is really important, which is why I'm really passionate about that these days. I wish I had a mentor then, but I mean, it is what it is. And but with everything that you see as a mistake, there's like two other strengths that come from it. So I wouldn't really get too wrapped up about regret being a bad thing in and of itself. However, that was, I was kind of aimless. I was taking a bunch of classes. It wasn't like I was getting into trouble or something, but I was, I took more classes than I needed to. And then I discovered photography. Now, this is in the twilight of the film era. I believe I might have been the last or one of the last classes at my university to study film photography before the transition to digital. I remember I was an early adopter of digital photography at the pro level, and the chair of the photo department at the time was saying like, "Oh, it'll never be anything." Like he's doubling down on film, and then like fast forward a couple of years, and
it's completely gone.
yeah. But I mean, that's something to be aware of for all of us, though. You pour yourself into something, and it becomes your reality, and then anything else can be an incursion into it. And it's like, no. Like I want to keep what I'm, the world that I know. And there's a tension between that. I think there's pros and cons. But anyway, I just lost myself in. I'm not even exaggerating. Like I spent 36 hours in the darkroom accidentally. I went in, and I was just enthralled with the process. and I went out and I didn't realize it was the next day. I had a bottle of
Wow.
water. That's all I had. And then I didn't even know I was hungry. And then like once I was outside and I was like, I went in on a Tuesday, I exited on a Wednesday, and I was like, I should probably eat something.
That's
And
insane.
it is insane, but it's you're outside of time. That's another thing. Like there was this contradiction or this surprise where I thought of photography as a visual medium, but most of the process is completely done without sight.
Mm,
And because because of the photoreceptive film, like you can't have light,
yeah.
and that's how your eyes see. So your other senses are heightened, and you start to like see with your imagination. Like you hear something, your imagination kind of makes it real in your mind, and it's a transcendental experience. Um, my goodness, there's so much I could say about that. You're like you memorize like distances to things. You're like listening for clicks on the aperture of the enlarger is essentially like a camera in reverse where you put the negative in and you raise it or lower it depending on how big you want the picture to be, and then you focus
Mm,
it. And then there's a relationship between the aperture size and the duration of the light going through.
mm,
And there's a different strategy that you could have. For example, if you want to manipulate the image between highlights and shadows, you create custom tools in order to do that. And you're essentially like painting with light, dodging and burning, as it's called.
right. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
the more time you give yourself to do that, the easier it is to do. So you might want to like make a really small aperture hole so that the light takes longer to kind of fill
Right.
the photoreceptive paper.
Because a bigger, it's like it makes mistakes easier. I assume something like that.
Well, you have less time. So if
Oh,
you
okay.
open up the aperture, let's say f2 or something like that, then it's just like boom. It's like a big dump of light on
Okay.
your photoreceptive paper, and that if you're lazy or just want to get it done, like if you got it all dialed in, like maybe that's not a problem. But the for people that might be curious, the flip side of that in the outside when you're making the negative, with a wide open aperture on your camera lens, that's what gives you the cool shallow depth of field. So there's these
Mm,
relationships that you have between the aperture size and the shutter speed, the amount of time that you're allowing light to reach the sensor in these days, the film in those days. There's like an art and science to it, which I like, the intersection of art and science. So anyway, I poured myself into photography, and
wow.
I was good at it. Like at school, I got an award. I taught summer school with a photo professor. I'm still actually friends with. Just saw him like a month ago. Um, and but the problem was I knew nothing about business. So
Mm,
after graduation, it was all like technical on the photo side. So I excelled at that. But the real world is different than the walled garden.
yeah.
And it was rough. Like working as a photographer was rough. I knew nothing about negotiation, about
Mm,
like valuing my services, all sorts of stuff. And so I got like, it's kind of pros and cons. I liked the first job I had as a photographer. I got a friend from school said, "Hey, I've got this job. A friend of mine is like changing jobs, and he wants to know if you might be interested in something like this." And so I said, "Yeah, it sounds interesting." And so I got on a call with him, and he's like, "Yeah, just told me a little bit about it. Like, told me a little bit of the quirks and stuff to like prepare for." And he said, "But it's a great learning experience," which it was. Um, and so I talked to the boss, got the job, and he's like, "Can you be in Chicago in 3 days?" Now this is before like smartphones,
mm.
so you had to like prepare like old school movie style. Like we had the internet, so you could like go to Google Maps,
Go
but
to
you
the
had to like
light.
print stuff
Okay.
out, or you had to
Yeah.
remember it. I prefer printing it out. And so I had to like I'm in like LA, so I'm like I've never been to Chicago, so it's like where's my hotel? Where's the client meeting at? What's the best way to get there? These times of days, like what are taxi fares? Like all sorts of stuff. And it was like being a spy a little bit. I liked it. And so it's like 3 days, got to be in Chicago. It's funny too because Southern California, like you don't really have harsh winters, and so I brought my like winter coat from Southern California, and people kept this was December, and people kept asking me like, "Where are you from?" And I was like, "SoCal." They're like, "Yeah, that's what I thought. Like that is not a winter coat." I was like, "Oh." Because the wind just cuts right through you in the winter there. Nice city though.
Mm,
But anyway, I like the travel aspect of it, and I like meeting the building managers and the clients and stuff like that. Had some cool experiences, but long hours. I don't think I was able to understand the valuation of my service as well, and a few other quirks in business that I just didn't love working as a photographer after about a year.
Mm.
And a friend of mine from school was in Japan on the program that I mentioned to you. And he said, "Why don't you come over here?" And I love Japanese food. I love Japanese art, love Japanese everything. I just never thought of visiting, much less living there ever. I just never crossed my mind, to be honest. I don't know why. Um, and I I wanted to go to, I've said this a couple of times, but I wanted to go to London to pick
Mm.
up a British accent because I didn't know that I needed business knowledge. I thought just a British accent would carry me far. And friends said, "Why don't you go to, you can always go to London. Like, we're going to Japan. Just come with us." And I was like, all right, fair enough. So this goes back to me building in dead days on tours. I had no plan when I went to Japan. I was just tagging along with some friends from school, and I loved it. Like, I fell in love with the place. And I think a lot of that had to do with removing, like, not holding on to the outcome. I didn't expect anything of it.
Mm.
I didn't have any plans. I didn't have a checklist or anything to do. I was just there, present in the moment, experiencing Japan. And I believe it could have been anywhere, and I would have loved it. I think that's a great way to live life, and that's what I encourage my clients to do. So I was like, I was aware too that I had some blind spots, and I thought, you know what, like, when when else am I going to have a chance to just like live in another country and have this experience? So yeah, let's do it. So I figured I'd just do it for like a gap year, just a year, and a year became two. And there was a lot of learning, as you might imagine, but I'd say almost like an existential crisis. After like 3 months in the country, I realized I was illiterate. It was
Mm.
almost like locked in syndrome, where I'm an adult human that had instantly reverted to like a baby state, like an infant state. There are
Mm.
3-year-olds that were more fluent than me. And that's just like very humbling. It's like, I can't read, I can't speak. Like, I have thoughts in my head, but like there's no way to like communicate with people except for like, pointing and stuff. And I, of course, tried to learn. I got a book and I practiced. And after like a year, I got conversational. But it was quite a shock. And after I started to learn some words, it's like, okay, this is a word for that. So when I have this thought, I can use it that way. And it's like, like, because it's a whole different like culture. There's a whole different
Yeah,
like,
the grammar is
operating
different too.
system,
Yeah.
everything,
Yeah.
humor, everything. And I was like, crap. Like, I kept trying to get value out of my existing knowledge. And I'd say more often than not, it was actually an impediment to growth.
Mm.
It actually held me back as an obstacle. And so I had to let go. And
Right.
that was a hard experience as well if you're not used to it. And I had to basically boot up a new operating system, install a new operating system on my root drive that's like Japanese David, and just grow up in
Mm.
that environment, from day one. And
Wow.
yes, as you start like doing that, you can pull in existing knowledge in new ways. You synthesize, and that's what's kind of cool too. But I realized at that time there is so much that I don't know, that English and American culture and identity and all of that is just one version of many in
Mm.
this reality. And I want to learn as much as possible. So a friend that was a couple years ahead of me in the program, you can stay up to 5 years. I was, like I said, planning just to stay one. She was on her third year, and she was going, she was leaving after that. And she said, 3 years is too long, her experience. But she said, 1 year is too short. So stay at least two. And that, for some reason, I just latched onto that like a dog in a bone. I was like, okay, 2 years. And I did. So I did 2 years. And then I was like, okay, next 2 years in Korea.
Mm.
From Southern California, there's a lot of Koreans in school as well. So I thought, okay, Korea is the next logical step. Then China, then India, then as many countries as I could. I know it doesn't make sense, but I wanted to do like as many as possible because I realized
Right.
every country is going to have something I don't know. Um, but what happened was kind of interesting. After 2 years in Korea, I saw Japan in a new light. Like, at first, I could only see Japan like point to point. It was like,
Mm.
compared to America. But then living in Korea, I could see like, oh, this is like, I just saw it like different. It was almost like depth perception. And so I wanted to go back with this new kind of relationship I had with it. And I guess maybe it's a little embarrassing to say, but in the States, when you grow up, at least when I did, we're taught that everyone can be American. Like, it's just, it's like a global community. That's the idea anyway. Um, and so when I went to Japan, I tried to be Japanese. And
Mm.
of course, there's many like shortcomings on my part, but I mean, I couldn't really become Japanese, but also like, that's not really, it's not the same culture as the States. It's more like meeting them on their terms, like understanding the role in the relationship to some extent, at least. And when I was in Korea, I kind of got that. And so when I went back, I just went back as David instead of trying to be like, Japan's adopted son or something
Right.
like that. And I had a much more comfortable experience, and I liked it. I liked it a lot. I think it's good to kind of like have touch points and like travel and stuff, and it can be challenging. Like you go through culture shock. It's like a never ending kind of process of ups and downs. The craziest thing though is having culture shock when you go back, because you assume that you're just gonna go back and things will be like they
Everything's gonna be
were,
cool.
but you're different. The place is different, and so that was quite an experience too. I fear I might have rambled a bit longer than expected, but I'll
No, it's
pause there if
very
there's
interesting.
anything.
It's very
Okay.
interesting for me because I do want to travel the world as well. And seeing this perspective, it would prepare me a lot. So what you mentioned earlier was very interesting to me. It was as if you were mentioning like when you went to Japan, you had to become a blank slate in a way, right? Is that kind of like what you were mentioning earlier? You mentioned that you had to kind of in a way forget that you're American so that you could adopt a Japanese mindset. Am I correct?
I'm not. It's interesting to hear you put it that way. I'm not sure that you're wrong on any of those points. But when you say it to me, I'm kind of like, is that what I thought? There's a couple things to keep in mind. Um, if people aren't, I mean, they probably are familiar these days, but Japan is very homogenous. So if
Mm,
you're not like Asian, for example, you will stand out, particularly if
mm,
you're not like in Osaka or Tokyo or like a major city. I was like about half an hour or an hour north of Tokyo. So much of my days, I was the only person that looked anything like me.
mm.
And that's kind of an interesting experience if you haven't had it. It's there's pros and cons, let's say. And but one interesting thing is if you don't look in the mirror every day, like you start to think that you're Asian,
You're
like you start to think you're like the people around you. And I remember a couple times when I caught my reflection, I was like shocked. I was like,
mm.
it wasn't like I screamed or anything, but I was just like, oh yeah, right. I'm like, I don't look like the people around me. I stick out
Mhm,
because we're social animals, so you start to like pick up mannerisms and whatnot from your environment.
mm.
So that was one thing where there was kind of like this desire for human connection
I
to
see.
blend in, to basically adopt the majority, mannerisms and whatnot. And then there's, I guess, when I would try to share like who I was, like share my humor, for example,
Mm,
or share the way that I would structure sentences or arguments. I kept often coming at like having limitations doing that because I was trying to do it in an English way. And
right.
I have a Japanese friend who was my one-on-one English teacher, sorry, one-on-one Japanese teacher, and she said she understands everything I say. It's like magic in
Mm,
Japanese, and she makes me think I'm much more fluent than I am because she understands everything. But she
right.
said, "You speak Japanese like you're speaking
But
English."
right, yeah, yeah, yeah. I definitely get that. I get that a lot here in the Philippines because weirdly enough, my first language is Filipino. I spoke Filipino growing up, but I mean, I did a lot of competitions doing English, and
Yeah.
like my ex girlfriend, she was the one who kind of really got me into the whole English speaking, nothing but English every day uh, way. And then you kind of know that I'm thinking in English when write in Filipino. Does that make
Hmm.
sense? So it's like I
Yeah.
think in English. So if I was to speak to a Filipino, I would need to like process my words so that I wouldn't sound weird because it would be English. Does that
Yeah.
make sense?
It does. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But so you went to Korea, and then after that, w- what other countries did you go all around? Like, did you travel all around Asia? Did you also go to Philippines?
Sadly, I've not yet been to the
Oh, okay.
Philippines. I want to. I don't know why. I think the main reason why is marketing in Japan
Oh, okay.
is best in the world. They capture you. Like once you're in there, like be careful. Like
You don't want to go out.
you're not getting out. I intended for Japan to kind of be a home base, and I'd like travel around Asia,
Interesting.
and I never made it out the first 2 years, like because they keep making these lists, and you keep feeling like you have to complete them, like the Pokemon, like collect them all kind of thing. It's like there's like 100 like views of this, 100 things to capture here, and you get these stamps, and like I mean it's intense. Yeah, they kept all of my money, and yeah, but I've traveled quite extensively in Japan. Second time I was able to break out from time to time. Went to Europe a few times, and I mentioned Southeast Asia, led some tours there. So once I was out, I could explore a little bit of the surrounding regions. But yeah, I probably traveled more in Japan than most people,
Wow.
and that's all credit to the tourism marketing department of Japan. But yeah, sadly not the Philippines. Korea for 2 years. I traveled as much as I could in those 2 years in Korea. Visited China a few times, 4 times I think. I mean, China's massive. I'd love to go back, particularly the Yunnan province in the southwest part. Um, Burma, Myanmar was amazing. I loved it. I'd love to go back. The food's incredible. Like it's like a mix between like Indian, Thai, and Southern Chinese. Really cool spices and really warm people. Thailand's amazing. Vietnam, of course, is amazing. I've not been to Laos, not been to Malaysia. I hope to go to Malaysia soon. Singapore is wonderful. Well, here's another thing, and apologies for anyone in Singapore, but it's happy ending. I loved Hong Kong. Like Hong Kong is an incredible city. I've never seen anything like it. Like it makes Tokyo seem like a library or something. Like it's just like
Wow.
there's a
That's
total. I
big.
mean, I'm probably exaggerating to some extent, but and also I lived in Tokyo for a while or the surrounding area, so I kind of got used to it. So maybe I took some of it for granted. But Hong Kong just has this different energy. It's like just a little bit denser, a little bit more like I don't know. There's a higher energy or something. And the architecture is really interesting. And when they did Ghost in the Shell, the movie, they actually used like Hong Kong as the background inspiration instead of Tokyo, like they might have in the 80s. So that's interesting too. But anyway, I loved Hong Kong. Bruce Lee fan as well. He born in the States, but grew up in Hong Kong. And so I was Hong Kong and Singapore have like some similarities. They're kind of often compared to one another, or used to be anyway. And so I'd ask people on like my tours and stuff, and otherwise, if they've been to each, like what do they like and which one would they prefer, or something like that. And I often, it's not like it was an exhaustive research, but of the few folks that I asked, a few of them had said that they preferred Hong Kong and that Singapore was like kind of sterile and kind of like boring or something like that. I believe those were the words. I don't mean to besmirch Singapore. So I kind of put it off. I like lowered it on my visitation list. And similar to how I described my time going to Japan without any plans, I was going to Bali and I thought, I might as well, I think I had a transfer in Singapore. I was like, I might as well add a week and just experience Singapore. But same thing, I had no plans, and I'd heard, that it's, not as exciting as Hong Kong or whatever. And I absolutely loved it. Like it's one of my favorite places.
Wow.
It's the architecture, the food, the people. Like it's incredible. It's like again, I was visiting. I wasn't living there, so I don't know about the dynamics of like paying taxes and all that. But from what I experienced there, I could see myself living there. Like it's yeah. So I share that because just be careful about like the stuff you tell yourself or the stuff you hear from others. Like there's so many variables, and I think it's really
Important to
if
try
there's any kind
yourself.
of, I'm sorry.
It's important to try yourself.
Well, for sure, it's important to try yourself, and I would actually add there's some nuance to that. Sometimes you're doing stuff, but you're not trying it for yourself. You have preconceived notions, or those to-do lists, or your mind is clouded by attached to an outcome. So, like, don't attach to an outcome. Just experience the moment and see if you like it. And I think most of the time you probably will. That's been my experience anyway. But yeah, and then traveled Europe a bit as well. And yeah, I love travel. The challenge I think is revisiting a place I've been to already versus going someplace I've not yet been, because you can't
Mm,
do it all. And so
right.
I think to each of us, we have to kind of find a happy medium there.
And all this time, when you were traveling the world, were you a tour guide or what were you doing at this time?
Uh, I traveled a lot as a tour guide for a couple of reasons. My my clients were travelers themselves, so
Oh, okay, I
it's like
see.
it
So you're like a
enhances.
one-on-one, you're a one-on-one tour guide, sort of.
What do you mean by that?
So like, am I correct in thinking that you're a tour guide for people, not for the place? Or
Oh, well, like I'll describe it a little bit.
okay,
So I'd meet people in Tokyo in Japan. When I was doing Japan tours, they're 2 weeks long. I'd meet people in Tokyo, and we had an itinerary where we'd spend a couple nights in each city, in each destination. So I'd
mm,
do like Tokyo, Kyoto, maybe like Kanazawa or Hiroshima or something. It's like the usual, what they call like the golden route, where you go like Tokyo, Hakone is like a hot spring area about an hour away, Kyoto, and then maybe a couple stops outside. And that's like for people who haven't seen Japan before or something, gives you a good kind of cross section. And then we do more like far flung destinations where we do like the northern island of Hokkaido or the southern island of Kyushu or the smaller island of Shikoku, has a lot of history, or blend them and stuff like that. There's a lot of fun. I mean, the Philippines, for example, I'm sure you could do loads of tours there. Each
yeah.
island has its own kind of
Story,
personality.
yeah.
And yeah, and each like part of the island has its own kind of story. And so as you like meet people, like you meet the owner of the restaurant and it's like third generation and they're telling you about this and that. And yeah, it's a lot of fun. But yeah, I was largely kind of left to my own devices. I'd get like a 50 or 70 pages worth of like information on the
On
clients
the
and the
island. Okay.
destinations and the suppliers and stuff, and then I was like, I the way I look at it now is like a mini CEO. Like I had my company was my the 14 people I'm in charge of, and many of them were like older and more accomplished than me, and I had to basically like manage up. It's like, yes, you're more
I see.
accomplished than me,
Okay.
but you've got to like I've got to
Follow
kind
me.
of yeah I've got to get alignment here. So there's a lot of things to learn. It was
Uh,
interesting. But yeah, it was a group tour where it was me. Sometimes we'd have like suppliers who like meet up with like a Buddhist monk who do like meditation with us, or sometimes we have like private drivers I'd coordinate with, or restaurant owners and stuff, or hotel managers. But like when we're on the move, it's pretty much just me.
that's interesting. The things that you're mentioning, I think, really translated to your entrepreneurship journey. So when you were a tour guide, you mentioned you posted something about the pandemic forcing you to kind of study, or not forcing you, but making you realize your lack again of entrepreneurial skills, business skills. Am I correct in that?
Um, I'm trying to think because I framed that a little differently in my mind.
Okay.
The way that I looked at it, I mean, I could say yes. It's not that's always going to be true, I think. But you can always learn more. But the thing that really kind of struck me with the pandemic, the way I felt, was that we're not in control. I poured myself into this career, and I was doing good at it, and I had plans, and then all of a sudden, it wasn't like I got laid off or there's some kind of competition. Like the whole industry disappeared. Like
Right.
around the world, it's like what like nothing really prepared you for that. I thought like regionally, like maybe Japan has an earthquake and there's like 6 quiet months or something like that, but no, it's like poof, gone. Like Earth does not have tourism.
Okay.
And I was like, oh, okay, there's levels to existence, and so I figured I need to expand my network, I need to expand my knowledge, and yes, you have a point. Actually, I did decide at that time to go to business school
Okay.
rather than twiddle my thumbs and wait for what I knew to return, which I think is probably good. Um, and in business school, that's when I learned kind of some of the terminology and whatnot that I could then retrofit. It's like, oh, I was doing entrepreneurship. Like I was designing tours, I was like leading teams and this and that, iterating, etc., focus interviews, what have you. And so then I was like, that's kind of what I mentioned earlier, where I applied tourism to entrepreneurship.
Right, right. And during that time, when you were studying business, were you a full time student, or were you already kind of like learning, starting a business and learning as you, or applying as you learn?
Great question. So uh, I the shock of the pandemic kind of just freezing the industry uh, made me realize, or I felt that I needed to do many things at once.
Mm,
So I created a value matrix to decide where to go. Um,
mm-hmm,
I wanted to do business school. I wanted to go somewhere I had not been before. I wanted to study outside of the state that I studied, if not the country that I studied an undergrad, just to again diversify my inputs. And I was looking at cost. I was looking at location. Like, is it going to be a pleasant place to spend an unforeseeable amount of time, 1 year, 4 years, etc. We didn't know how long the pandemic's going to last, etc. And the program, like, is this going to be an interesting program? Is it like collaborating with other schools, etc.? So I settled on UBC in Vancouver, Canada, because it's part of a global network of 32 universities around the world.
interesting.
And I availed myself of that global network to my fullest ability. I took 10 courses at different universities around the world, met a bunch of great people, many of whom I'm still in touch with. And it was a wonderful experience. And in some cases, I know the pandemic is, bad, but in some cases it made a lot of good changes in my life. So
Mm.
good and bad kind of, go hand in hand, I think, in some cases. But sorry, could you remind me of your question?
Right. Did you already start a business while you were learning, where you were going on business school, or did you study first and then apply it to a business?
Thank you. So I was looking at the programs and I chose at UBC. It's called the Professional MBA.
Mm.
It's essentially like an executive MBA for mid-career professionals. And I was thinking that would give me the flexibility to network with people that are further ahead than me, much like my clients were in Japan, on tour, and also give me the flexibility to start applying that learning outside of the classroom in a job like you might have mentioned. And so I was doing both at the same time.
Mm.
And I was new to Canada, never lived here before. Fortunately, I speak the native language, which does help. But inside, everything's a trade off. And inside, I was very much Japanese, very much Asian. And people don't expect that. And anything people don't expect, there's like friction, at first. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. It's just something to be aware of. And,
Mm.
you grow in unexpected ways. Everyone does. But that was kind of like, it was when I first went to Japan. I spoke to some Japanese American or Asian American friends on occasion, and I was talking about, like, sometimes I'd be followed around the supermarket. This like little grandma's like wondering like what I'm putting in my basket, like what does this creature eat or something, and it's kind of cute. I get it, but it's unnerving if it's like surprising if you're not used to that.
Mm.
And so I was like sharing that, and it's like, you guys are so lucky, like you blend in. I wish I could blend in. And they're like, trust me, we have it way worse. Like, they assume we're like locals, and then when they talk to us, they feel betrayed or something like that. And I couldn't understand what that was like until coming to Canada, and it's like everyone just assumes I'm Canadian. Like, I
Right.
keep telling them I'm
Okay.
not, and they're like, no, you're Canadian. Like, and it's just cute. It's like, okay. I didn't know what like a toonie was. I didn't know like what geography, like they're like talking about this lake. I was like, what lake is that? And, yeah, they look at you like something's off, like you got dropped on your head or something. It's like, no, I'm the newest immigrant in our class. Like, everyone is more experienced than me in Canada. But that's kind of, it's interesting. It's an interesting experience. I do it again, but it was surprising. So anyway, I networked. I got plugged into a Japanese Canadian charity when I arrived, because I was basically coming from Japan. Now I'm a mentor to a Japanese lady who just came from Japan with her family. So it's an interesting, like, serving as a somewhat of a cultural bridge between Japan and Canada in a small way. And just networking like a madman, just like, getting involved with the board of trade, putting myself out there, signing up for
Mm.
like consulting sprints to like learn things I don't know, meet people that know a lot that I don't, and just apply myself over and over again, and just enjoy the process. And I grew a lot as a result. And I'm
Mm.
applying what I'm learning in school and vice versa, like taking what I learned and taking it back in the classroom. So yeah, it was a really good growth curve for me, I think, those 2 years in the program. But I discovered that I am an entrepreneur. Like
Mm,
I like thinking outside the box. I like breaking the rules, let's say.
yeah.
Um,
I mean, it
of
was obvious when you were a child. You wanted to be a daredevil, bro.
Right.
Yeah.
I I call them outsider insights. When I was in Japan, looking like I look and whatnot, it might be surprising when someone goes, they might expect a Japanese guide. Like, what are you going to
Mm,
teach me here that like I couldn't look up on Google or something?
yeah.
And even some Japanese guides, like licensed guides, were kind of softly curious about the same thing. And then after over years, I demonstrated that I knew some things they didn't. Like I'd show them places in their hometown that they didn't
That they
know.
didn't know. Wow.
And we could all do this, by the way. It's not special to me. It's just it's a perspective. Like you take things for
Mm,
granted when you can be blinded by belonging.
hmm.
Because it's like, oh, I've got to go to work. I know the road to take, and you do it, and you just take it for
Yeah.
granted that that's the best way. Someone comes in, they don't know any of the rules, and they're like, why don't you just do it this way? You're like, what?
Yeah.
Like you're a genius. Like I'm a genius.
Yeah.
I don't know anything, so I see things for like how I see things, and in some cases the incumbent will be smarter and better, and in some cases the new immigrant is going to be smarter and better. And so if you find that kind of relationship, you can synthesize something that's where the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, I think. And so that's kind of what I leaned into in tourism. I maybe if this answer isn't going too long, I turned my clients into collaborators essentially,
Mm-mm.
where we're basically working together on making the tours better. I tap into
Yeah.
like their knowledge of because they traveled with other companies in other places, and like, okay, what could make this better? And on those free days that I mentioned, I'd collect the data and like, okay,
Mm.
this restaurant over here is worth checking out, because it's like more than any one person can do. So each tour I iterated and I got better and better.
Right.
And
It's kind
I
of like
think
feedback in a way,
yeah,
right?
yeah. And
Yeah.
I was
Yeah.
actually
Yeah.
training the Japanese licensed guides. And
It flipped.
yeah, it went full circle. And at that point, they like, wow, I mean, they know stuff that I don't know. I'm not, they're better than me
Mm,
in many respects as well. I'm not saying I was better, but it was just a matter of having unique knowledge. Like you have unique knowledge that I don't have, Nathaniel.
yeah.
And everyone has that. So it's a matter of being humble enough to learn from others, being confident enough to provide what you know,
Mm,
and hopefully finding the people that allow you to like supercharge that.
mm. Very interesting because I feel like the stories that you tell, it, what you mentioned about was that outsider insight is, in a way, you're always sort of a stranger in places that you put yourself into, right?
Yeah.
Like especially when you were traveling. But then because you were a stranger, you could see the whole picture, and again, what I mentioned earlier, kind of like a blank slate. And so you didn't have preconceived notions of what should be. So you
Right.
could think of what could be instead of
Exactly.
what should be.
Well said.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And so you mentioned earlier you were networking, you were doing a job, and when did you decide? I believe your first business is Horizon Search, or is there something else before that?
That's right. That's right.
Okay, and when did you like realize, okay, I want to start my business now?
That's really interesting. So I struggle with shame and low self-esteem. And so I didn't think that I could do it.
Mm,
I had to be given permission to do it. And
interesting.
that was a block. That was a mental block. I would say for anyone, if you're experiencing something similar, it's not true, but just recognize it if you find that might be true for you, and try to address it, because that's not true. But what's funny is I was doing a mentorship with a lady in the States, a really interesting lady. She has an amazing career. And I was doing this, I guess, like a mid-career accelerator program at the Board of Trade
Mm,
to augment my my MBA experience. And the manager of the program I was in at the Board of Trade and my boss in the mentorship program, two ladies, different countries, don't know each other, within the same week, both told me that I should start my own newsletter.
mm,
I never even thought of that before. And but I was like, okay, like serendipity, like, they're both giving me permission to create something of my own or something like that. I don't know if that's the right way to put it, but in some sense, that's kind of how I felt, like I needed to be given permission to do it. And so they believed in me and they said, you can do this, you should do this. So then I just did that. And here's the thing, do. Like, don't worry about, is this right? But just do. And like as you do, this is what it's been true for me anyway, you start to learn so much faster than passively learning or observing. Not to say that there isn't a place and time for that. There is, but just do. You're gonna learn so much more, I think. So as I started that newsletter, I was like, well, maybe I need a website. As I built the website, I was using a Wix template for convenience. And in one of the, I don't know what you call it, but one of the things you drop in, it said like podcast. And I was like, ooh, maybe I should do a podcast. Literally, it was a Wix template with like podcasts like built in that like added on to me kind of, it's crazy. And so, because I like tourism, basically you're doing a moving podcast without being recorded in some sense. So I was like, yeah, this makes sense. But it's weird, like it's signals in nature. Everything is in front of us. Everything, nature is constantly giving us data, but we're not like picking it up if we're not in the right mindset, if we're not like integrated with our authentic selves, I think. And so I basically was like finding like breadcrumbs and clues of like where I was supposed to be, I think. So that blind spot I mentioned earlier on, it's like the veil was starting to be lifted and I was starting to kind of find home. And you know it when, like when someone says something true and it hits you in the bones, even if you never heard it before, it's like, oh, there's some truth to that. Yeah, it's kind of like that, where it's like I'm finding
that warm feeling.
Bit. Yeah. So anyway, so yeah, it led into the podcast, led into networking. And as I was doing the podcast, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I just knew that I wanted to learn and meet more people and share some of that knowledge with others. And in so doing, I just met some people that really liked what I was doing. Offered me like kind of partnerships or collaborations or introduced me to someone else, gave me like ideas. And I just kind of iterated from there. Been doing it a little over a year now. I think coming up on 100 podcasts. And
wow.
It's, I call it like a river, like the media river. And many people go to the river for different reasons. Some go to fish, some use it for transportation, some use it for washing, etc. And so the podcasting or whatever your creative endeavor is the river. And then it brings different people to it. And like I mentioned with the outsider insights, they can see a way that you can use it that you couldn't. And then you kind of riff off of that. So that's a little bit about how that started.
That's very interesting. It's like, in a way, you kind of also, am I correct? You kind of stumbled into business because you didn't really plan it out. Someone just gave you the permission, and then that's what you mentioned. It's like, you kind of snowballed into something big, which I think most people, or at least most entrepreneurs who last in the game, I think that's what happens to them as well. I mean, that's what's happening to me. I kind of didn't plan doing entrepreneurship. I just, kind of stumbled across, posted in Twitter consistently, and then suddenly I blew up. And then, oh my God, I need to do an offer, blah, blah. And then just things fell into place.
Yeah.
But I think, I want to see your thoughts on this. And this is why I think those who do it by accident wins, because when they do it by accident and they can continue doing it, they're doing it for the sake of doing it, not because they're holding into a money, because like people who start a business whose goal is to make money, if they don't get that money in like 3 months or 2 months, 1 month, they give up. But with people who start because they just wanted to start, or they were given a permission, or they stumbled across it accidentally, they do it because they love it. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of truth to that. I've learned to hesitate making like rules.
Generals. Okay.
Because, but yes, largely I think what you said holds true. For me, I would say I leaned into survival, and I just figured out the rest. And I think that's where I thrive. That's how I adapted, and I could force myself to fit in, if you will, into corporate environments and dress a certain way, speak a certain way, but it always burned more energy because I was trying to be someone I wasn't. So rather than like doing the task authentically, I was doing the task like playing a role almost. So when I leaned into more discovering who I am and being who I am, and I wasn't like, I don't have the typical background, it would seem, and for whatever that means. And so I'm a bit of a misfit. I'm a bit of an outsider. And when I lean into that authentically, ironically, I find a lot of belonging, like wherever I go. and a lot
Interesting.
of understanding. So it's this weird thing where I found anyway, as you try to fit in, um, you are rejected or you don't fit in.
Yeah.
As you don't try to fit in and try to be yourself,
Yeah.
you are welcomed in
Yeah.
because you're unique. There's no other Nathaneal, you know?
Hmm.
And so once again, to the audience, I would just say, if any of that resonates with you, like just try to be yourself.
Yeah, I think the first thing, when you were mentioning that, I think the most important approval, or the most important sort of fitting in, is being comfortable being yourself. Because when you're comfortable being yourself, um, it's like when you're comfortable with your skin, you attract the people who will be comfortable around you. If you try to fit in and you try to like manipulate your identity, you get you don't feel comfortable with your skin. So it's actually, I think it's your brain telling you that you don't belong here,
Hmm.
and you're just a imposter in a way. So even if people welcome you, you still feel like you're an imposter because you actually don't believe in who you are.
That's deep. I think you're right.
Yeah, yeah. But yeah, okay, moving on with your horizon search. You posted a tweet which was very nice. You mentioned your vision of building a global community of entrepreneurs, and you also mentioned like you believe everyone is an entrepreneur. What can you try to really quickly break that down? Share us more. What do you mean by that?
Well, I use entrepreneurship fairly liberally. I think life is entrepreneurship. Like I mentioned,
Mm-hmm.
I leaned into survival, and entrepreneurship, basically, to me, that's what it is. Being an immigrant is an entrepreneur. Living is entrepreneurship to an extent. If you get laid off, you have to pivot. And I still keep in touch with some people from business school who went the corporate route. They're not the classical entrepreneur, but I try to tell them to adopt the entrepreneurial mindset. I believe that's going to make you more valuable within the organization. And what I mean by that is repackaging existing knowledge, using those outsider insights, and recognizing what is of value. This is something I talk to my team about, the concept of value exchange, rather than latching on to duration or cost, because that's a waste of your own time. I believe if you're fixated too much on, of course you have to do that to some extent. I'm not saying you don't, but I believe what really moves the needle is recognizing and delivering value, and that if you know kind of what your boss desires or would help them, off menu items, things that aren't in your job description or they don't know about, and you can deliver and demonstrate. I think that will help you secure your security in the corporate environment if that's what you wish. Move ahead if that's what you wish, and then of course in the jungle of entrepreneurship where you don't have 401ks and U.S. Retirement plan, a safety net. Um, that's even more apparent. Where I think you need to network, test, and because you could find something that works in your local market, and it could be a significant value. It could be of greater value in a
In the
different
global
industry
market.
or different
Mm-hmm.
region, or you might meet someone in a different industry or different region that really enhances what you're offering. So there's just so much. I'd say like get outside of your comfort zone and discover those unknown unknowns. So that's a little bit about what I meant about entrepreneurship and everyone being an entrepreneur. Is they're testing their own model. We each have our own model of reality, and we're testing it every day.
Interesting, interesting. And you want to connect each entrepreneur, as you mentioned, because you feel like everyone has something to offer to someone, as long as it's of value. Does that sound right?
I believe so, to a large
Hmm.
extent. I mean, I don't think we're all, by design in the same place at the same time. I mean, you're teaching me stuff that, I didn't know, and you're probably half my age. So it's like, it's not like, we're all gonna meet and capture value right away. But to
Mm,
a large extent, I think that's true. Like, let's say you and I didn't get along or something. I still think there'd be value in that. Like, we'd each
yeah.
learn something about ourselves and about the
Right.
other. It's like, if nothing else, like, oh, there's people that don't agree with what I say, or there's people that think that. How's that possible? And then maybe you dive down that rabbit hole and learn. So yeah, to a broad sense, I think it's true. Practical sense, like, maybe you need to make some decisions as to where you spend your time. But yeah, I think that's broadly true.
Great, great. And right now, what do you think is the biggest challenge for you to achieve that mission of yours?
I don't think really anything at this point. I
Okay.
know that sounds crazy to say, but no, I think I got this. I'm
God
loving it.
damn, let's go.
Yeah.
That's great, man. I love that mentality. So, knowing that, what do we expect from David Lovejoy in the next couple of weeks, months?
Well, hopefully a part two in the future, and I think I've got some exciting projects that I'm looking forward to announcing. I'll be announcing them on X. An AI company and a another media company
Mm.
that I'm partnering with. So yeah, some big growth happening for Horizon Search. A lot of excitement for all of us, and yeah, just keep getting after it, folks.
All right, all right. And where can they find those announcements?
David Lovejoy X at David Lovejoy X on the X platform, and at Horizon Search X if you want to see some of my latest podcasts.
Cool, cool, cool. And one last question that I like. This is my favorite question. If there was one question that you wish I asked, what would it have been?
Oh, good question. I thought you did a great job. What I don't think there's anything that you didn't ask that I wish you had. Um, oh, I guess like travel or food related, I guess. But
Okay. What and how would you have answered that? Like, just off the top of your mind right now, just anything that you want to share, really. Basically, that's what I'm trying to say. Anything that you
okay.
want to share.
Well,
Yeah.
in that case, I would say this then, not travel and food related. Those are great. But I would say recently I've discovered that I believe nature is largely fair and it's giving you information that you can use. And
Mm,
you may or may not be recognizing it. I believe that people are largely wonderful. And
mm.
I think if you feel that there's some friction, a lot of that friction might be internal. And I would encourage you to explore that.
Beautiful, beautiful. Well, there you have it, folks. David Lovejoy. Enjoyed talking to you, my man. Thanks for hopping on.
It was a pleasure. Thanks, Nathaniel.
All right.